My strategy is to keep some cash and to short the market. I don't sell my uranium stocks unless I'm trading out of a company for a company specific reason, or I see the market getting overheated to the upside. Neither of those things are happening right now. So I hold my uranium shares for the long term, and I add on weakness as I'm able.
Welcome to In It to Win It. This is Steve Barton, and thank you for tuning in. We are back with our resident uranium expert, Justin Huhn. Justin, thanks for coming back on the show.
Happy to be back. Good to see you, Steve. How are you?
Excellent. I'm doing very well. Yeah, thank you.
Nice.
Thank you. Got a lot of listener questions, kind of following a whole bunch. We're not able to get to all of them, but I think a lot of them are pretty similar, and we're kind of able to condense them down as best we could. Okay, so let's get right into it. Jan via email, she's talking a lot about HALUE. So can you just kind of give us a quick 60-second overview of what is high assay, low enriched uranium?
Sure. It's actually still it's higher enriched uranium is really kind of the more accurate description for it. So the typical enrichment levels for, let's say, light water nuclear reactors is somewhere in the 4.4 to 4.6% U-235, and a high assay low enriched would be up to 19.9% enrichment. So it's still lower enriched than like a enriched uranium for a nuclear warhead or something like that, which would be in the 90th percentile of U-235. So it's basically just a higher concentration of the U-235 isotope, the fissile isotope, and the primary usage for HALUE is in some of these advanced reactor designs. So there's a lot of these SMR, small modular reactor, advanced reactor designs that are intended to be fueled by HALUE, and basically it's fuel that has more of the fissile isotope. It can burn to hotter temperatures, and it can potentially burn for longer periods of time. So some of these designs have they don't have refuelings for 20 years, for example, that are running on HALUE. And the problem is right now that the primary source of HALUE up to kind of now-ish has been Russia. And now that there's being an SMR push, an advanced reactor push kind of in the States and in Canada and Europe, they're looking for other sources of HALUE. So which is why we're seeing an entity such as Centrus getting Department of Energy contract rewards to establish a HALUE circuit to be able to produce it. And supposedly the first core load of HALUE for the demonstration projects, which would be TerraPower's Natrium SMR reactor and X Energy's XE100, both will be running on HALUE. That high enriched or higher enriched uranium will be coming from downblending from the United States, from the DOE. And so, but they want to establish HALUE circuits in the States for future applications and to be able to have some sort of supply chain resiliency for this critical element.
Okay, yeah, I remember when we first started this maybe a year or so ago, almost all conversion and enrichment happens in Russia, correct?
Well, no, not necessarily, but they are the biggest player. So they're about a 40% of the world's enrichment and mid 30th percentile of the world's conversion. So they're not the majority, but they are the largest contributor.
Okay. And this is getting into Jan's question. So Centrus claims to be the only prominent enrichment facility in the U.S. and the only one that offers HALUE enrichment. Is that accurate?
Not necessarily. There's another enrichment facility in the United States. It's just not owned by an American company. So that's Urenco's facility in New Mexico. That's a British company, but they operate in the United States. They also have facilities in Europe, and the other major Western enricher is Orano, and their facilities are in Europe as well. So you have Urenco in New Mexico, and then you have the Centrus facilities. And Centrus essentially, they're operating the facilities, but they don't own the facilities, to my understanding, like the actual centrifuge cascades. But perhaps that's why they got the DOE contract reward for funding to establish the HALUE circuit. But as far as them being the only producer of HALEU in the United States, that, to my understanding, is correct, although it's still in the works. I don't know that they're necessarily producing it yet, but it's coming. They should be producing it relatively quickly. Then there's plenty of other bureaucratic red tape and regulations around the handling of HALEU and the transportation of HALEU. So that's going to take many years to get through that. URNJ has talked about producing HALEU. I think that they want to establish and expand, their enrichment capacity both in the States and abroad. And their messaging to the market continues to be that they need to see not only higher pricing, but more enrichment contracts coming from the utilities. So even though there's been a lot of enrichment contracts signed in the West over the past 12 months, both URNJ and Orano are not about to invest, billions and billions and billions of dollars to expand their SWU capabilities, their separative work unit, or the energy utilized for enrichment. So their capacity, their SWU capacity is not going to expand without more contracts, more enrichment contracts at higher prices. So they continue to signal that to the utilities.
Okay, and SWU, separative work unit, is kind of like another word like calorie or BTU or something like that. Is just specific to uranium, right?
Yeah, pretty much. It's a measurement of essentially kind of the energy that it takes to produce enriched uranium coming from natural uranium feedstock.
Okay, all right. Centrus also claims they have preferential agreement with the U.S. government to establish extra capacity to prevent dependency on Russia. And they will be adding a lot with government funding. How long does this take? Is it as special as they claim? Is their position unique?
So it's about $1.5 billion to establish 1 million SWU. So right now, there's about 27 million SWU in the West, which is about 40% of the globe's capacity. And it's going to take many years. It's going to take many years. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Enrichment in Australia. Australia seems to produce a lot of uranium, but not much is said about it. They also seem to have an established enrichment CO company, I guess. Is that pretty accurate?
I'm assuming they're talking about Silex. Silex is a company that's based in Australia that has proprietary laser enrichment technology. Cameco is a minority shareholder of the global laser enrichment, that technology. They have the option to increase their ownership of that. Silex, even though the company is based in Australia, their first proposed production facility will be in the United States at the Paducah, Kentucky, where they will be, it's proposed that they will be re-enriching depleting tails using this laser technology. And they could be commercially operational as soon as 2028. As far as other unique, I believe there's one other company that's working on yet another technology for enrichment. I believe that is in Australia. I was reading about this the other day. I apologize, I'm forgetting the name of the company. But it was interesting because this technology did not need the uranium oxide, the U3O8. It didn't need to be converted into a gas, into uranium hexafluoride, or UF6. And then, of course, deconverted back to uranium oxide before it's fabricated into fuel. So maybe we'll hear more about that going forward. That seems interesting to me. But as far as actually there being current enrichment capacity in Australia, not to my knowledge.
Okay. Okay. Enrichment mechanics. Does enrichment reduce or increase the mass of uranium, or is there no change? Are there losses in the process?
That's an interesting question. Well, I suppose so. The actual enrichment process is taking this gas and spinning it at very high speeds in a centrifuge, because the U-235, the U-238 isotopes have a different mass. So that centrifuge spinning actually separates those isotopes very slowly. I mean, it's spinning very quickly, but it takes a long time to separate because the difference in mass is very, very small. But the fact that it's increasing the concentration of the lower mass isotope, I suppose that it actually is decreasing the mass. But you then end up with leftover material, which is the tails, and it's not necessarily waste because that material can be utilized. So I suppose there is some material that is lost in that process, but that waste material still has a decent amount of U-235 in it. So, which is the, the fissile isotope, that's the good stuff that you want. So when enrichers have extra capacity, they will sometimes take those depleted tails and they'll spin them again and try to extract more U-235 out of them, and then come back up to that 0.7% U-235, which is natural uranium UF6, and they can sell that UF6 in the market, or they can potentially continue to enrich it all the way up to enriched uranium product, which is 4.5%-ish. So yeah, I suppose there is some loss material, and the end product is slightly lower in mass, I think, just going off of what seems logical to me based on the lower massed isotope being increased in within that final product. So that's my best on the spot kind of logical math, but I don't know if that's correct.
Okay. It's more than I know. Okay, modular reactors. I'm assuming we're talking about small modular reactors. This technology appears to be amazing and well suited to big factories away from grid lines. How long will it take to get these up and running? How significant can their impact be on the market for uranium?
That's a very, very good question. First of all, I'm going to plug my friend Art's work from Segra Capital. I don't know if you can, is this reversed or does that look normal to you?
That actually looks normal.
All right. The Advanced Nuclear Fuel Cycle, they wrote this in December. It's on their blog, Segra Capital. Definitely check it out. It's a brilliant short piece on the potential for SMRs and the potential for the actual fuel demand coming from this technology. It's huge. It's huge. It's hard to put a number on it because it's difficult to tell exactly when we'll hit kind of critical mass with these things actually being up and running, and how much of a snowball effect we'll see with countries embracing the technology. I mean, we hear a couple times a week another news story about yet another country seeking to build SMRs. Right now, just in the UK, they announced last week that they're going to have essentially sort of a contest of various SMR developers to kind of make the case for that being the best fit for the country to establish SMRs there. Obviously, there's the DOE's program in the United States with 2 demonstration projects. That's, like I already mentioned, TerraPower's Natrium and X Energy's XE100, but there's dozens more that are in various stages of testing, a lot of them at the Idaho National Labs. Obviously, there's NuScale's Voyager reactor that is proposed to be built in Utah. And then Canada is building a GE SMR. And currently, right now, they're already breaking ground on it. But the big thing with these is that because so SMRs technically have existed for a very long time, right? This is basically, if you look at the nuclear navy, for example, you have submarines powered by very small modular reactors. It's not necessarily a new concept, but the way that they are being designed and pushed, I suppose, now is sort of a new concept, in that they can be utilized on land in all sorts of various use cases, right? So it can potentially be used in shipping. It can be used in remote military locations. It can be used in remote mining locations. They can be used to create industrial heat. So huge use case difference, and the potential is really, really big. But because there is yet to be one built and connected to the grid and hailed as a success, it's hard to model that out, right? So that's really kind of it's kind of an X factor in a way, in that obviously momentum is moving that direction. Obviously, there's established funding and work going towards, like in the United States, like we just talked about with the HALUE circuit with Centrus. It's moving that direction, but we don't know what the demand will be like. With all of that said, most of the designs are advanced and running on HALUE. That takes, in order to enrich up to 15 to 19% U-235, it's going to take more feedstock on the front end. So, but the actual feed per kilowatt hour generated, I don't believe is going to be all that big of a difference from what we're seeing now, and they'll potentially be more efficient. But this is a new use case, and these are new reactors that are being built. So that is new demand technically. How soon will we see this demand? Well, I suppose if these first projects come online between, let's say, 2028 and 2030, we should see some uranium demand for that, you know, a couple of years prior to that, let's say 2025, 2026. But I can tell you that on the investing side of things, anybody that's doing supply and demand modeling going forward is generally being conservative by not modeling out for actual demand coming from these, because it's still somewhat speculative and it's kind of a surprise to the upside to the extent that there will be demand. With all of that said, it's certainly moving very enthusiastically in that direction. And again, please go read this piece from Art and Adam at Segra, because it's very well done. It's short and it'll tell you exactly what you need to know in terms of demand. Those guys, Art and Adam from Segra, know just about as much as anybody from the investing side of things on the potential for SMRs. They've got a private fund that is invested in a lot of private SMR companies, and even a fusion company or two, if I recall correctly. And they're very, very bullish on the future for SMRs. I mean, it's like, it's the future. I mean, if you talk to these guys, they'll tell you straight up, like, we think this is the future, and we think it's going to be a major, major deal, especially once you have the first and second and third hit the ground and they're up and running, they're clean and they're safe. And you know, it really could snowball in a big way.
Yeah, that maybe you can send me the link and I'll put it down in the show notes.
I'd be happy to.
That was my first thought with it was, you know, I'm really into gold, obviously, and was having it at a big gold mine. If you can have this SMR, you are your own power grid, you know, and you can run the whole mine off a little SMR out there, as long as you got water. Okay, modular reactors, Kazatomprom. Their stats are not visible to the public. How can we invest in them? What is their cost per pound?
Their stats are available to the public. I'm not sure what stats they're talking about, because they are a publicly traded company. So they just actually released their Q4 last week. And they listed not only their profits and all their operational expenses and everything in comparison with 2021, which, by the way, their profits more than doubled in 2022 over 2021, with much higher realized prices on the sale of uranium. They highlight their all-in sustaining cost at somewhere around $16 a pound, between 16 and 17 bucks a pound, by far and away the lowest cost producer on the planet. Their fully allocated cost, however, is a different story. It's considerably higher. That's when you actually calculate in the dividend that they pay to shareholders and basically every single cost associated with operating that company. So that cost, you know, we would have put that into the low to mid 30s, you know, 1 year, maybe 2 years ago. So it's probably pushing high 30s into the maybe even to the low 40s at this point, with inflation and everything that's happening, as not an all-in sustaining, but a fully allocated cost. But their AISC is extremely low, you know, less than 20 bucks a pound. Yeah. Okay. And you can invest. They're listed on the London Stock Exchange. KAP is the ticker. And yeah, it's the value play and no other company even comes close when it comes to actually modeling out, you know, forward cash flow and things like that. It's like, you can't do that with very many companies in this space, you know. When I do a discounted cash flow analysis, all right, you can count the companies on one hand that even makes sense to do something like that. But they're one of them. But they certainly have quite the geopolitical discount, you know, attached to the stock right now, just because of where they're located. Geographically,
their proximity to everything going on over there.
They're in between. They're right in the thick of it. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What I had to do, I did it on Interactive Brokers. I had to, being an American, I had to exchange my currency for British pounds and then buy it on the London Stock Exchange, you know, under KAP. But
100%. Yeah. Interactive Brokers will give most people in most places access to most markets. And yeah, they have a very simple currency converter. You can buy, I own, you know, stocks on the ASX and the TSX via Interactive Brokers. Yeah.
Yeah. I do too. Okay. Maybe more than half a year ago, I heard one of the major U.S. utilities procurement head in a nuclear conference, Constellation, I think, made a comment that they are in no hurry to enter the purchase yet. Justin, at that point, was saying he felt puzzled. What is the situation now? Are they still in no rush?
I don't remember saying that I was puzzled, or if I was, why I was puzzled at the time, 6 months ago. So
6 months ago.
yeah, I don't actually remember that moment, but Constellation, for example, is a very large, very intelligent, ahead of the curve nuclear utility. So they are likely much more covered in their forward requirements for every element of the fuel cycle than most other nuclear utilities, especially in the United States. So a comment like that sounds like he's speaking specifically about their own company's needs, their own utilities, or their own operations needs. So I can't really speak exactly to that. And I think that going forward, they will be in the market buying more uranium, but they're probably better covered than most in the space. Also, I think 6 months ago, and I can't, like I said, I can't speak directly for this person coming from Constellation, but I can tell you that generally speaking, for nuclear utilities, especially in the West, 6 months ago was only 6 months into the war in Ukraine. And at that point, there was and still is huge movements in the price of every element of the fuel cycle. Uranium less so, but conversion and enrichment, UF6, EUP, SWU, spot and term SWU, spot and term conversion. All of these things went through the roof last year because of this, self-bifurcating market, really. So a lot of utilities were, and some of them still are, waiting for the potential of this conflict to end and for the potential for markets to kind of revert to the mean. Therefore, basically saying that, hoping that in the near future, Western utilities will be able to continue to buy from Russia without any sort of problems attached to that transaction, whether that be ESG, whether that be shareholders of the company not wanting to see them doing business with Russia, whether that be transportation issues. So, for example, coming up in the next few months, the only shipping line that can carry this class of material, this radioactive material, is a Canadian shipping company, and they had given a 12-month leniency for them to continue to deliver, Russian products to the United States, to Canada. Will that get extended? I don't know, probably, because a lot of these utilities they need that material, and there's not a lot of alternatives available, at least for the short term. So where am I going with this? Basically, what has changed since then is that this bifurcation not only has it continued, but it's intensified. And so the conflict continues to intensify. The separation in this kind of Eastern versus Western world thing that's happening, like that continues to intensify. So I don't know how long that's going to last. It does look like it's going to stick. I have a hard time thinking, this is just based on what you see in Western media about the conflict and about Russia and about Putin and everything else. It's like, just based on that, I would be very surprised if, when there's a ceasefire or some sort of resolution to that conflict, which hopefully there will be, that things just go back to normal. It doesn't look like that's the case. So, but of course, we're not really betting on that, but it would have effects on the market. So if we see official sanctions, that's going to have an effect. If we see the war end and all of a sudden there's peace and understanding between the West and Russia, that market's going to open back up, right? So there's utilities, and this is the reason why utilities carry inventory, and they have, a minimum of 2 years inventory in the US and 3 years in the EU, is because, well, first of all, the fuel cycle takes 12 to 18 months, period, if not longer, to get from mined uranium to fabricated fuel. But also when there's some sort of geopolitical shakeup, being such a globally entwined market, that they have something to buffer. And so utilities have been drawing down on that buffer. And for the utilities to say 6 months ago. Now, the utilities, this is one person from one utility, but they're a big one. For them to say they're not ready to come to the table to purchase yet, that means they're covered sufficiently to kind of wait this out and see if things settle down a bit. And so what we know so far this year is that term contracting volumes have improved significantly. At this point, in fact, I'll get the UX Weekly in the next couple of hours. So I apologize, I don't have the updated number, but I think we're somewhere in the mid 50s in terms of millions of pounds signed into long-term contracts so far this year. Long enrichment contracts have been very robust. The volume there has been high. So it's moving in the direction of this contracting cycle being very significant, regardless of whether or not this utility had stated that they were not ready to come to the table about 6 months ago. So with each passing week and each passing month that utilities are drawing on inventories, and this conflict is not going away, and or it's not getting more socially acceptable or physically easier to receive deliveries from Russia, then those contracts are being signed with Cameco and with Orano and with some of the other traders as well.
Yeah, I definitely learned that lesson firsthand with some investments that we had in Russia, and it should have been blatantly obvious when you got 100,000 troops right outside the Ukraine border, but no, that that went to shareholder heaven. Gazprom? I thought that was a good bet. I guess I was wrong.
Gosh. Right.
Live and learn. There's definitely a premium on the stuff in the West. Okay. Bad Fox. Aside from miners and producers, what areas should we be researching? Transporters, storage, etc. Thank you.
Oh gosh, that's a good question. There's a handful of companies, let's say, that are on the fringe of awareness of investors in this space that have some sort of exposure to nuclear and or uranium. But we don't focus on them that much because they don't tend to have leverage based on that. And that's probably been a good thing over the past couple of months. But in the long term, for this bull market in uranium that we believe is going to continue, the leverage really is with the mining stocks. So that tends to be what we focus on. But my understanding, well, I suppose there might be a way for exposure to conversion in the forward years with Cameco's deal with Westinghouse. If Westinghouse gets Springfield's up and running, the Springfield's conversion facility up and running in the next 3 to 5 years, then you have some exposure to conversion, but it's hard to have exposure to conversion. There's no publicly traded companies, to my understanding. With enrichment, you've got Silex, you have Centrus. Those are kind of the main ways you can expose yourself to that. Then you have the miners, transportation companies. We just haven't done our due diligence on that, so I'm not really gonna just throw out guesses on that. There's a couple of other companies. A company like GE, for example, that has a very small portion of their business is nuclear buildouts, and their collaboration with Hitachi. I think GE Hitachi is going to be a big player in the SMR space and in the large nuclear reactor space as we go into the next couple of decades. They're probably a huge player. How much will the GE stock get credit for that? I don't know. Probably very little, if any, at all.
Yeah, when it's just a few percent of your business, then you're not really getting
right on it. Yeah. Right. And the same might go for Rolls-Royce, who's wanting to develop SMRs. A company like Fluor, which is kind of like a multinational energy conglomerate, very large company, and they own a big chunk of NuScale. But is the Fluor stock moving on NuScale news? I don't really know. It doesn't really seem like it. So we tend to focus on the more concentrated ways to expose to what I think is going to be a pretty robust market going forward.
Okay. From Leonard D. If I did see a post at some point on Twitter, Sprott Uranium is supposed to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Is that true? Will it have a major impact on raising money?
They applied to be listed last year and it was denied. And it was denied because they don't have a redemption mechanism within the trust. So for their, let's say for their silver physical trust, for example, the Sprott Silver Physical Trust, if you above a certain level of investment within the trust, you can actually redeem your shares in that trust for actual physical silver. Yep. And apparently the NYSE was requiring that there be for a physical fund or a physical trust, you have to have a redemption mechanism within it in order to be listed. And that's not going to happen. So NYSE, not happening. As far as I can tell, unless there's new news, but I haven't heard anything. And every time we've talked with Sprott, they haven't mentioned that, oh, you know, this and that has changed and we're still pursuing that. Would have been nice, would have been really nice to have a listed options market for SPUT, but, you know, no dice. So we're stuck with the TSX. We've already seen what they can do in the TSX. So I think it's sufficient. Yeah, it would have been nice to get on the NYSE, but they can do what they need to do in the TSX.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I know with their gold trust, you can redeem, but it's something like 400 ounces of gold. So
right.
No one's going to do that except a bank, maybe.
Right.
Okay. Kevin R. Do most long-term uranium contracts include some kind of mechanism to compensate for inflation costs of production?
Could you repeat that?
Most long-term uranium contracts include some kind of mechanism to compensate for costs of production. So in other words, if they get a 5-year contract, are they upping it 3% a year or something to make up for inflation?
Yes. Okay, so there's kind of two main types of contracts. One would be something called a base escalated contract. And these are the types of contracts that you'll probably see more happening with developing companies. So whether that's not necessarily even brownfield. Brownfield is probably getting more market reference contracts, but greenfield developers, so like the Encore Energies and the Global Atomics, companies like that are working towards producing and signing contracts. These contracts are probably base escalated. So what that means is the company will say, okay, well, this is the absolute minimum we need to receive, period. And we'll set it there. And that will escalate as the years go out based on inflation expectations, essentially. So it's sort of like a fixed contract, but each year the price goes up by whatever they negotiate between the producer and the buyer. And that would be a base escalated contract. And then the other types of contracts that Cameco, for example, is signing, at least to the extent that I understand this, because they don't really share this information very readily, it just kind of leaks out here and there, is more along market reference contracts, or at least majority market referenced. So that's with floors and ceilings. So in similar with a base escalated, you have a base. So let's just say Cameco will sign a market reference contract. And for this example, the contract will be entirely referenced to the market, not fixed in any way. And that will have a floor and a ceiling. So market reference with a floor of 60 and a ceiling of 95, for example. And at the time of delivery, that is whatever the market is pricing, that long-term price, which is published by UxC. So right now that's $53 a pound, this is super controversial because these new contracts are being signed at 59, 62, whatever it might be, but they're still printing 53. Well, 53 is what Cameco gets when they deliver that uranium. And but there's a floor and a ceiling. So the floor is kind of their minimum. The ceiling is the utilities maximum. Like, we're not going to pay more than this. And then they agree on that. Now it works both ways. So Cameco gives themselves, and I say Cameco, there's other entities signing contracts like these, but they give themselves plenty of upside potential with reference to the market, right? So and even with a ceiling price in the 80s or 90s or whatever it might be, still major upside especially for their production costs with those extremely high grade mines. And it also caps the risk, and it defines the risk for the utility. And that's pretty important for a utility to have defined risk, because then they can budget for that. So if the price spikes to 150, well, Cameco didn't capture all of that upside, but they captured enough upside to operate, a profitable company. And that's what they're looking for. So yes, base escalated contracts will have adjustments for inflation. Market reference contracts will have floors and ceilings. And then sometimes you'll see contracts that are a mix of fixed and market reference. So you'll have 60% of the contract will be paid at the time of delivery at the price that is dictated by the market, and 40% will be fixed at $55 or whatever it might be. So
Okay.
they pay 55 for half of it, or 60, whatever the fixed price is. And then the remaining portion of the contract will be referenced to the market price at the time of delivery.
Okay. Okay. This one's interesting, and maybe we can pull up the graph as we go through this. What would Justin's strategy be if the spot price finally starts moving up consistently, but then we get another great financial crisis or worse? What would you do with shares? And so, I'm kind of seeing that, there's a real risk of just the S&P 500 of hitting down maybe around 3,000 or something. At some point, I think, maybe I'm wrong, we're going to get a decoupling like we've seen recently with gold and the stock market. What's your strategy with this if we get another liquidation crisis like we did in 08?
I mean, my strategy is to keep some cash and to short the market. I don't sell my uranium stocks unless I'm trading out of a company for a company specific reason, or I see the market getting overheated to the upside. Neither of those things are happening right now. So I hold my uranium shares for the long term, and I add on weakness as I'm able. And so, I mean, that's a good question, because right now I am generally short-term bearish on the market. I don't know where it's going. I don't know what the Fed's going to do. I don't know what the Jay Powell is going to say on Wednesday. I don't know what the rate hike's going to be. I can't predict these things. I'm guessing they're probably going to go 25 beeps on Wednesday. I'm guessing the market's probably not going to like it. So yeah, I'm short the market, and I have a chunk of cash just in case we get some extreme, like liquidity crisis type moves, because I think everything goes with it. Like you mentioned, we've seen a little bit of decoupling, and this seems to have more to do with the banking crisis than it does the movements of the S&P, right? We've seen some movements in Bitcoin and gold, a little bit in silver as well. And that, in my opinion, seems to be a reaction to what's going on with the banks, not necessarily in preparation for another big down move in the S&P 500. It seems to have to do more with kind of like sound money type moves. I mean, that's just my kind of take on it. But will uranium shares get hit if the S&P goes down steeply? Undoubtedly. Yeah, probably. I mean, historically speaking, that has been the case, of course. And if you want, I can share my screen.
Yeah,
of course, we've been moving in and out of this coupling to the S&P over the past number of years. And, you always have a relative performance, right? So URA relative to the S&P still way up from, the 2020 lows in the beginning of the bull market on a relative basis. But here we're starting to break down a bit, making a lower low for the first time in quite a while. Still on the long term in the early stages of the outperformance, but we tend to move down with it. I mean, that's just been the case when there isn't a significant driver for the uranium market in present mind for uranium investors. So that would be like a strong move in the spot price. By the way, if the spot price is moving up and you think the S&P is going to fall, I would not be selling shares. The thing with this market is that I don't know if we're going to have a news story come out tomorrow that says Russian uranium is being sanctioned by the United States. I don't know if that's going to hit tomorrow. There's already legislation calling for that is co-signed by 6 bipartisan co-signers, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans. That's moving towards the House, I believe, at this point, to vote on that. If that news story hits the headlines, we're going to see a reaction in the market. Yeah. And I don't want to be sitting in cash waiting for the S&P abyss when my market starts to fly. So understanding what I do about this market and the structural nature of the physical commodity, I cannot be short this market and I cannot be uninvested. And that's just maybe that's my own psychological problem. Maybe I'm looking at charts and seeing, okay, I shouldn't be long this right now because of how the chart looks, but that's not how I operate. For a fundamental investment for me, I'm in this thing for the long run. I don't like to trade in and out of uranium stocks. I do it with other stocks. I've done plenty of trading this year already. I've had multiple shorts on the market that have mostly been profitable. And then I use that cash to buy more uranium when it's red. And that's what I've done for 5 years, and I'm going to keep doing it until it stops working. So, do we see a liquidity crisis washout? I don't know. I think the chances of it happening are definitely greater than zero. Do I think we eventually see rates come down and we see inflation stick and we see commodities roar? 100%. So compared to the S&P is a tricky one. If we look actually at some stocks within the space, you had RSI just falling off the screen for pretty much every stock in the space and looking much, much worse than the S&P itself. And so what is the S&P going to do? I don't know. What is the price of uranium going to do? It's going to go up. Will it go up between now and when the S&P might sell off? I don't know. All I know is there's some stuff coming in the short to midterm that I can't even talk about, but gives me a lot of hope about this market, even in the, let's say, less than 6 months time frame. So I can't not be long, but I'm short the S&P with a put spread right now, and I have a decent cash position. I don't have all of my investable net worth in uranium. So when I say we're fully invested in uranium, we're fully invested in uranium, but I still have cash and I still am short the market. And I have a decent allocation to gold and silver, both miners and physical, which has been a nice buffer over the past week or two. So that's kind of my own personal strategy, I suppose.
Yeah, and I mean, just one thing I learned from Rick Roll for sure is like, if you fundamentally believe in the thesis, when they get cheaper, you buy more, unless something is fundamentally changed in uranium, which to my knowledge, it hasn't. Essentially, it's just become a better deal. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I always laugh at that point because most of the time you hear these quotes being proffered around Twitter where you have a lot of people kind of complaining about price action, and justifiably so. I think everybody is surprised by the length of this correction in the uranium market, with everything looking so fundamentally strong, and how robust that first move up was. But it is what it is. These resource markets can really shake you out. So for people to say quotes like that, it almost sounds like you're being an apologist for the market action, but that's really not the case. Like, Rick really, really believes what he's saying when he says it. Like, it's like, okay, I bought a can of tuna yesterday for $1 and today it's on sale for 50 cents. Am I going to scream about it? Or am I going to buy more tuna? Like, I'm going to buy more freaking tuna because I can eat it 2 years from now. It makes a lot of sense. And he 100% believes that. Like, I've spoken with him in the past, and I remember I was at the time, I can't remember what had just happened. It was something very positive, and I was talking with him about it. And he was like, I don't know about you, Justin. I'm just hoping that URNM breaks down below that 200-day, man. I really hope. And like, he's being 100% sincere. Yeah. It's not rhetoric. It's really, really, I mean, if you seriously believe that the price is going to breach $100 in the next 2 or 3 years, I mean, why would you even complain about a drop unless you're all in and you have no option for adding to those positions, which I get, but you shouldn't be all in. Nobody should be all in ever. Yeah. Especially in one sector. It's just stupid money management. It's stupid risk management, and nobody should be doing that. So protect yourself. If you're bearish short term, throw on a hedge. I like put spreads because they're cheap and I understand them and I get a lot of leverage. So if the S&P, let's see, what did I put on? I don't remember. I think it's a late April expiration. If the S&P is below 390, or maybe it was 385 in 5 weeks from now, I've 4x'd my money. So I can take on a 1 or 2% portfolio position. And if the market roars and that goes to zero, I don't care because my whole book is on fire. Yeah. And if the market turns down, I've just done a 4X on a 1 or 2% position. I've got a nice little chunk of cash to throw into my longs that I intend to remain long.
Yeah. Yeah. He told me if you have a 5-year time frame, it's a no-brainer. And, look at these pullbacks as opportunities.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, Dan Heaton. What are your thoughts about Sprott's new ETF? I assume he's talking about the junior uranium ETF.
I like it. I like it. My stepdaughter owns it in her portfolio. I've been nibbling on that for me. I mean, the liquidity sucks, but that's the same way URNM was when it started too. They're not going to self-fund it with hundreds of millions of dollars. They're going to put it out there and let the market figure it out. So the liquidity is no good. But I like it. I like where they're going with it. I think it's just going to give more leverage in time to the juniors. And even though it's the juniors, I think it only is excluding a couple of the largest cap stocks.
Okay.
I think it's excluding Cameco and Kazatomprom, but I think pretty much everything else is in there. So it's not really like super junior. I mean, you've got, Next Gen in there that's 3 or 4 billion market cap or whatever it is. But still, it's relatively junior. I like it. I like it. I think it's great. I think it's going to do well over time.
For a beta play, this is easy.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Can you share your screen and we'll go over the underfeeding and overfeeding slide that you had on your last update?
Sure. This one?
Okay. Explain this to a greenhorn. What are we looking at?
Okay. So the enrichment process, which we've already covered a little bit today, actually, is the process of separating the U-235 and the U-238 isotope. So the U-235 isotope is fissile, and natural uranium, which is the industry's term for UF6, uranium hexafluoride, which has already been through 2 chemical processes they call natural uranium. All right, it is what it is. Natural uranium is 0.7% U-235. And in order to enrich it up to 4.5% for the nuclear utilities, you have to increase the amount of U-235 in that mix. Okay, so the UF6 goes into the centrifuge, it spins for a period of time, very high speeds, and that concentration of U-235 increases. So the way that they determine the amount of time and effort going into the enrichment process to take that natural uranium up to from 0.7 to 4.5% U-235, or in this graph, they have 4.4%, right? LEU, low enriched uranium, on the left side there.
Okay.
In order to do that, and the way that they determine the amount of effort and time to put into that process, and therefore the cost of SWU, right? So the amount of SWU and the cost of SWU are actually inversely related. So right now the SWU price has gone way up, but the enrichers in the West are using less SWU because they're moving the material through the process faster. And the only way that they can do that is by allowing there to be more of the fissile isotope in the waste material. So the waste material is the tails. When I say waste, it's not waste. They can re-enrich it. It still has value. They hold on to it. Okay, it's not waste, but we'll call it waste. So the best analogy, and there's a bunch of lemons over this chart. I don't know who did this, but the best analogy has always been this lemonade stand analogy. So lemonade stand, let's say you've got like a levered press for squeezing the lemons, and the lemon juice is the enriched uranium product, right?
Okay.
And so you got about a bunch of lemons there. The lemons are the UF6. And if you have, let's say, low demand, you're sitting out there, you're roasting in the heat, and there's one person that came up and walked up to your lemonade stand. You can take the lemons and you can squeeze the heck out of the lemons to get as much juice as possible out of that lemon to make the lemonade, right? There's no reason for you to be wasteful and use less effort and use a ton of lemons to create a cup. There's no line running down the street. You can just make lemonade for this nice person in front of you, and you can squeeze very heavily a couple of lemons and make a glass of lemonade. Okay, so that is a low tails assay. So that lemon rind that you just squeezed, that's got barely any juice left, that's down here. That's 0.15. Okay. So you just went from 0.7 to 0.15. So that waste material's got barely any juice left in it. Now, what they could do is, what underfeeding is, now before I explain overfeeding, you have to understand underfeeding. Underfeeding is when you as a nuclear utility signed a contract with an enricher, and the contract dictated 0.2 tails. So basically what the enricher is saying is, I'm going to make this EUP for you at 4.4%, and you need this many tons of 4.4% EUP, but I've got a ton of capacity because business is slow right now. So let's sign this contract at 0.2 tails, which means I plan to operate my centrifuges at 0.2 tails. So that dictates a number. When you tell them X number of tons of EUP at X percentage UF6, U-235 at 0.2 tails, that kicks out a number of UF6 pounds or tons of UF6 that or KGU that the utility has to provide to the enricher, right? So you make this contract and say, okay, you want this much EUP at this level of enrichment. We're going to operate at this tails assay to make it for you. Sign on the dotted line. Cool. That means you have to give us this much UF6 based on 0.2 tails. So what happens is when they get that delivery of UF6 to spin this material for the utility, if they have excess capacity at the time and they start spinning down to 0.18, 0.17, they'll actually use excess energy and time to produce the same amount of EUP. And because they're going to a lower tails assay, less good stuff in the waste, they're squeezing the lemons harder than they told the utility they would be. They now have extra feed. So they literally underfeed the centrifuge, right?
Okay.
So they have extra UF6 because they're not using all the material the utility gave them, because they're actually running their centrifuges at a lower tails than what the contract said. That's underfeeding. Now, what do they do with that UF6? Sell it in the spot market. That was a big, big secondary supply source for many, many years. So the opposite of that is what's considered overfeeding. So overfeeding is basically where demand is all of a sudden very, very high, unexpectedly high, and they want to capitalize on that demand. And how do they capitalize on that? The SWU price goes way up. And the SWU price goes way up because they're now utilizing less SWU, and they're spinning the material faster, or they're moving the material through the process faster because the demand is there. So if you've got a line running down the street at your lemonade stand, you're going to throw the lemon in, give it a quick pump and a quick pump and a quick pump to get it out fast. And what happens is you've got much more juice still in the leftover material, right? So that means
in the tailings.
Exactly. So now when there's big demand, you've gone from 0.17, 0.18 tails, maybe up to 0.15 tails, which is why we've got that we are here. Western enrichers are actually operating in the mid 0.2s. That doesn't mean that every single centrifuge cascade is there, but they're moving in that direction. And I guarantee you the contracts that they signed with the nuclear utilities to provide the material that they're enriching right now, we're at lower tails assay than 0.25. Okay, so what that means is if they signed a contract at 0.2, then the utility provides them the UF6 sufficient for a contract for an enrichment process at 0.2. But if they're going to run at 0.25, they need more feed. So the enrichers actually have to go out and buy more lemons because they are operating at a different tails assay than what the contract said, at a higher tails assay. And the reason they can do that is because, they can dictate where they operate. And so they're doing this to move it through faster because there's so much demand right now coming from the West for Western enrichers that they're trying to move it through faster. So they're operating at much higher tails. And they're doing two things. Charging much more for spot SWU. So spot SWU is like, hey, I need this enriched right now. I don't have a contract, but I'm going to send you some material. Cool. Okay. We'll save some capacity for the spot SWU because we can charge a lot of money for the spot SWU. So they make a lot of money on that, right? That helps cover the fact that they are having to buy out of their own pocket material from the market to overfeed, which they are doing. Other thing that they're doing is they're sort of borrowing from Peter to pay Paul in a way by new contracts for enrichment that they're signing now, that they will be enriching material for these contracts in future years. Those new contracts are being signed at even higher tails assays. So these are transactional tails. This is operational tails. Operational tails right now in the West are somewhere in the mid 0.2s, generally speaking. So what that means is these transactional tails now are getting into the 0.3, 0.35 range. So this red line here is the actual amount of UF6 that is needed to produce the EUP, right? Okay. That's the red line. As you move up in the tails assays, you move up in the feedstock requirements. So if you can look back here and see the amount of tons needed to produce 4.4% LEU, right?
Yeah.
You go back down to 0.17, 0.18, we're down here, less than 8. You go up to 0.3, 0.35, and we're pushing 10.5, 11. It's an incredible jump. I mean, from 0.18 to 0.35 is like a 30% jump in feed requirements. So that's really what, and also the amount of SWU is lessened by those tails assays, right? So if you want to spin, and the Western enrichers don't spin down to here. The Russian enrichers can go down to 0.1, but they generally haven't. But you use a ton of SWU, a ton of energy to spin the hell out of that material to get every last freaking drop you can, right? Yeah. So the faster you move it through, the lower amount of SWU is required, and the more the feedstock is required. And of course, also the higher the price for SWU. And so they are basically, these contracts that are being signed now with these Western enrichers have this incredible kicker that they're signing these contracts and, you know, north of 0.3. I mean, I really don't think people understand what's about to happen in uranium demand. Now, to speak generally, utilities globally are better covered for enrichment and conversion than they are with uranium. So it's not like every single enrichment contract is going to be at 0.3, 0.35 tails. No, but some of these contracts, the ones that are being signed by Orano and Urenco now, are pushing into that range. And that means the utility signing that contract is going to be buying 20 to 25% more uranium than they would have had to if they had signed that contract last year.
Okay. Yeah. Because they got a line of people lining up to buy lemonade, and they're going to need a lot more lemons if they're going to fill those orders.
100%. 100%. Yeah. And the lemon, you know, the overfeeding, that's on the enricher to source that material. But these higher transactional tails contracts, that's on the utility that's signing the contract to buy more uranium coming out of the ground to move through the fuel cycle. So, and the only way that that can be offset is if there was abundant UF6, just kind of above ground mobile inventory, and there 100% is not. There's no UF6, but that's also limiting the amount of overfeeding. So the overfeeding is a big deal, but it's not like this crazy thing that's happening right now where we're just ready for things to explode. No, that's not. We have bottlenecks in conversion. So Urenco and Orano, in their operational tails, they're really actually limited by available UF6 and spot conversion. So it's happening. It's happening a little bit, and it's going to increasingly happen more once we have the ConverDyn, the Metropolis facility online in the next month or two. But the overfeeding is not going to be a huge deal. What is a much bigger deal, in my personal opinion, are these transactional tails in these enrichment contracts and the amount of uranium demand that's going to have to be purchased 2025, 2026. Maybe it'll influence a little bit next year as well. It's just huge. It's just huge. And it's adding to the already very large supply deficit that's going to exist going into the end of this decade. So it's a problem. It's a problem for utilities. They just don't know it yet. Okay.
Interesting. Cool. One quick one. Okay. Probably 90% of the people watching this are invested in uranium. for the 10% that aren't, the questions I keep getting are, what about nuclear waste? What do they do about nuclear waste? All this nuclear waste that's out there, you know, is going to poison our babies. What? So they bury this stuff. I don't know, 200 meters underground or something like that, right? There's very little waste after the from these nuclear reactors. That and can you go through how this is a non-issue?
Sure. I mean, the first thing I would say is there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? I mean, every type of electricity generation is going to have some drawbacks. And I'll quote Doomberg, who's quoting Thomas Sowell, in that there are no solutions, there's only compromises, right?
Yeah.
Which I absolutely love that quote. You have, I mean, to compare other electricity generating sources, you have hydroelectricity, which utilizes an immense amount of concrete and absolutely decimates ecological systems and sometimes people. In the case of some dam failures in China, for example, the most devastating dam failures ever. I think they had a dam failure that killed over 100,000 people.
Oh wow.
So then you have geothermal, which is probably the least harmful, just utilizing energy from the earth. But that has its limitations. That's not going to solve an energy crisis on a global scale. Solar, you require extremely high temperatures to make the polysilicon that can only come from burning coal. They use heavy metals, they use mercury that gets buried in the ground. They only last 20 to 30 years and they get buried in a landfill. Wind power, same kind of thing, causes some noise pollution. The blades or fiberglass, they get buried in the ground. They last some same around time frame as solar panels. And they're intermittent. Both of those are intermittent. So they cause instability in the grid, which requires backups of coal and natural gas or batteries, which we can go down the rabbit hole of battery mining, battery metals mining. And then you've got nuclear. Of course, you have natural gas and coal. Natural gas is far cleaner than coal, but it still emits some small amounts of pollution and carbon. Coal, you know, the waste for coal power plants is in the oceans and in your lungs. So the waste for nuclear has never been an issue. There's never been an accident for nuclear waste. Nuclear waste is highly, highly, highly regulated from every step of the way, from the moment they pull it out of the reactor core to the couple of years it spends in a cooling pool, to actually getting placed in the long-term storage casks where it spends an eternity inside these casks. These are thick concrete and steel casks. There's very little notable radiation on the outside of the cask, even with some radioactivity still taking place within the spent fuel rods inside the cask. And some places are burying them. So, for example, I think that the Dutch are burying them. They're building a facility. Gosh, I apologize. I'm forgetting if it's Norway or Finland. I think it's Finland, the underground facility, if I recall correctly. Yes, this is deep underground, and these casks are buried and covered up in clay and then entombed in concrete. Of course, this isn't a place where the geology is such that they don't ever foresee there being a problem. Even if there were a problem, you know, hundreds of years down the road, the radioactivity is so minimal that at that point that it's not really a problem. The amount of waste that's produced by nuclear electricity is very, very small. So the example I always like to bring up, if you, Steve, had all of your electricity usage coming from nuclear from the day you were born until the day you die, assuming you live an average lifespan, would fit inside a Coke can. And so the United States has the largest reactor fleet in the world. 93 reactors, I believe, are operating right now, have been operating since the 50s. Of course, there was a full-on renaissance in the 80s. Sorry for the background noise there. And essentially all of the waste ever produced from the nuclear fleet in the United States can fit on a single football field 30 feet high. And it's stored in a very safe manner. It's never been a problem. There's radioactive plutonium in the waste, and people think that's a problem in some ways. That actually is very utilizable fuel, and hopefully we'll be utilizing that going forward in the future more. The French do utilize the spent waste. They utilize the plutonium from spent nuclear fuel and add that back to reprocessed fuel. They call it MOX, mixed oxide fuel, and they utilize MOX fuel in a number of their reactors. So it's not a problem, never been a problem. I mean, just to say that it's not worth talking about, I think, is to brushing it aside. I think it's important to understand that there's always trade-offs, and there's trade-offs with everything. And this is one of the trade-offs. You know, the other trade-offs with nuclear that takes a longer time to build and can be expensive to build. But the big score with nuclear is it's not even close. It's the highest return of energy on investment, and it's a more dense source of energy than fossil fuels. And humanity has to move in that direction to continue to grow and prosper, in my opinion. So, yeah.
Right on. Awesome. Well, thank you, Justin. That concludes all the questions and everything, and really appreciate it. If you want to check out all things Justin, go to uraniuminsider.com. There'll be a link in the show notes. There's probably over 100 of these companies, and Justin dumbs it down to the best risk reward companies and the ones with the highest leverage. So thanks again, Justin. Really appreciate it.
Always good to see you, Steve.
You too, sir.